Stop. Close your eyes and just listen to my voice. A story. An old, silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash! Silence again. Now forget about what I just said and start to think about everything that makes you worried. Maybe that's your future, your career, money, a college decision, your capstone. And forget about all of that if you can, and just listen to my voice. It's October. You're a high school senior helping out at a middle school Halloween event, and you're there with some of your best friends. The entire night, you've been trying to teach hordes of middle schoolers how to play spike ball with the incentive of a single selfie stick. After a couple of fruitless hours, you and your friends get a break, so you go inside, grab some pizza, and begin to watch a magician that they hired for the night. And after a couple of minutes, the magician actually does something magical. He begins to ask kids for their favorite number, maybe a 4-digit combination or their birthday month. And he adds, subtracts, or multiplies all those numbers together until he gets this huge 15-digit number that he spray paints across some butcher paper. He then asks a kid in the audience for a sheet of paper he gave him earlier in the night. And taking that sheet of paper back, he begins to unfold it, revealing a not quite magical phrase. It said, "Live in the moment." You can open your eyes. As a high school senior, I have been relentlessly assailed with speeches on living in the moment. The people who give these speeches always love to emphasize how we're all about to leave, abandon all of our friends, and jump into the unknown, but we just have to do the simple task of living in the moment. Now, isn't that wonderful? I just love it when people define living in the moment as not caring about anything or not giving a rip about the future. That was sarcasm, for those of you who can't pick up on that. If you think that living the moment is somewhat similar to that definition, well, you're terribly wrong. And if you don't think living in the moment is important, you can leave. I'm just kidding. But you're terribly wrong as well. Living in the moment is one of the hardest but most rewarding practices any person can do because it requires levels of balance and discipline few people ever care to engage with. But why live in the moment? As I will claim, living in the moment is the only way to experience life to the full. And if you don't live in the moment, then you'll live a life hardly as good as it should be. But before we get too much further, I'm going to have to define what living in the moment actually is. During my Capstone experience, I read a book titled The Remarkable Ordinary by Frederick Buechner. In it, Buechner talks about valuing the regular moments of life, i.e., living in the moment. Buechner defines living in the moment as stopping, looking, and listening to life. So stop and listen to my voice. An old, silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond, splash! Silence again. For those of you who don't know what I'm reciting, it's The Old Pond by Matsuo Basho, one of the most famous haikus ever written. And I want you to think about this haiku, not what it could mean, but what it says on a purely literal basis. The world is silent. A frog jumps into a pond, splash, and the world becomes silent again. The first step to living in the moment is stopping and noticing something other than yourself. As Buechner claims, literature, before anything, forces us to stop and notice somebody else's story, which is exactly what Matsuo Basho accomplishes with his haiku. I bet if any of us were walking in a park and saw a frog jump into a pond, we wouldn't think twice about it, we'd just continue on with our day. But for some reason, when that exact scene is written down, it captivates millions of readers and puts them in a very specific single significant scene. And that's simply because it forces us to examine a story that is not our own. A storyteller understands the significance of stopping and focusing on something other than themselves. Now I want you to picture the American Gothic by Grant Wood. It's that painting of an old man and an old woman standing outside of like a farmhouse and they're holding a pitchfork kind of like this. Now, I'm not super into art. That is not my wheelhouse in any capacity. So when I look at a painting such as the American Gothic, I see two very plain people in a very plain scene, and it's terribly ordinary to me. But it's one of the most famous paintings in the world. One of the reasons for this painting's uber fame is Wood's attention to detail as he paints two very plain people. He's capable of putting two people's lives into a single painting. Now take the Mona Lisa, for example. It's another painting of a pretty unremarkable scene, but I will claim that it's the single most famous painting in the world. Art, before anything, forces us to stop and look at something other than ourselves. Artists have this skill mastered of seeing the beauty in everything. They look at landscapes and people's faces and even just emotions and are capable of illustrating them for the rest of us to be mesmerized by. We too should act this way. We should look at the world the same way an artist does, or look at people's faces the same way Leonardo da Vinci looked at Mona Lisa, noticing the beautiful, intricate design of everything. An artist understands the significance of looking at something other than themselves. Everyone in here knows who Frank Sinatra is, right? It's okay if you don't, I just won't forgive you. But to ring any bells, I'll be singing a brief portion of one of his songs. You can sing along too if you feel comfortable, but don't overshadow me. This is my moment. You make me feel so young. You make me feel as though spring has sprung. And every time I see you grin, I'm such a happy individual. Now I love music, and I really love jazz. I could talk about music and jazz all day if you'd let me, but I've got about a 20-minute time limit, and I really need to get going. One of the most beautiful things about jazz are these things called standards. A standard is a song every jazz musician should know, so when a band gets together, they can jam on one of these standards. And by jam, I mean freely solo over the rest of the band while the band keeps the basic structure. Sometimes, if the band is good enough, multiple people can solo at the same time while maintaining the integrity of the song, even going so far as to talking to each other as they interweave their solos with their instruments. They have this concept of listening down. Any good musician must have the skill of listening and keeping time mastered. And by listening and keeping time, I mean both keeping the tempo of a song, the chronos, but also noticing the phrasing and the quality of the song, the kairos. Chronos and kairos are these two Greek words that refer to time. Chronos to the actual quantity of time, and kairos to the quality of time spent. Just as literature and art helps remind us of things that we typically ignore, music reminds us of these two types of time. Speaking from personal experience, I have gotten lost in many a song, and it's always wonderful. We get lost in music when we're listening to it or singing to it, even just dancing with it, because it engages with us on such a wide range of emotions. Noticing the time in this manner is incredibly important because it separates a lazy Saturday from a fun Friday night. If I can't remember what I did all day because I spent all day watching TV, well, I'd consider that time wasted. But if I start to notice the time I spend and I start to remember the time I spend, well, then I'm going to try to make the time I spend worth remembering. If we all listen to the world the same way a musician does, then we'd hear the beauty of everything and notice the quality of time attached to it all. A musician understands the significance of listening to the world and noticing the time they're spending. But before we get too much further, I want to identify two major hindrances that a lot of people have to living in the moment. These two hindrances are narcissism and distractions. Stopping, looking, and listening are all about taking the focus off of ourselves and putting it onto something else. Literature has us examine someone else's story. Art has us look at something that typically isn't ourselves. And music, while it's a bit different because it does have us often examine the time we're spending, in those reflections we can find most likely that the highest quality of time spent is time spent with others. Obviously, this is not a steadfast rule for all of us introverts in the room or people who like their alone time, but God is community, and as such it makes us human to be with others. But all of our lives, we've been nurtured to be focused on ourselves, on our story, our moment, our future, our aesthetic, our everything. But if we want to properly live in the moment, we cannot be obsessed with ourselves. Narcissism steals so much life from us, and it creates and breeds anxiety and stress and guilt and bondage to simple or stupid things that really should hold little or no significance over our lives. Now, I'm not going to lie and say I get stressed out easily. Rather, I have a tendency to worry about a good thing coming to an end. For those of you who don't know, I've been doing theater since the spring of my sophomore year, barring my 4th grade experience in Oklahoma. And I can remember 2 months out from when Cinderella was about to close, just the sadness I was feeling as I was worried I was going to lose all of these friends and all these great moments that I had created. And I remember closing night being so sad and devastated that was it. That was the end of my musical experience. And it's very easy for me to get wrapped up in this headspace because I'm focusing on myself, what I will lose. Some of the best advice I was ever given concerning theater is that we don't perform for ourselves. We perform for the audience and for God. Typically, this advice is given to us so that we don't use any inside jokes on closing night, but it actually changed how I perform. During Cinderella, I was devastated that the musical had come to an end, because I was focused on what I was losing. But then the next show, I started realizing that it's not about me. And the next show, I started believing that it's not about me, and so on and so forth until Oklahoma. Our biggest job as actors and actresses is not to be the stars of the show, but rather to do the best that we can do so that the show can be the best that it can be. This mindset helped me remove any dread or anxiety I have about the show ending, because I know it's not over for the entire cast. There are people who are still going to be here after I graduate, like all the freshmen or our beloved director, Mrs. Payne. So every night, we went out and we gave it our all because that's all we could give. This shift also allowed me to fully enjoy and experience the end instead of dread and become anxious over it. However, I do want to make it clear, though, I'm not claiming that narcissism is the root of anxiety. I will not be so bold as to claim that. Rather, I think that if we were a little less obsessed with ourselves, we'd also be a little less stressed out. Again, stopping, looking, and listening is about shifting the focus off of ourselves and onto the beauty of creation that surrounds us. Another major hindrance that distracts a lot of people from living the moment are distractions, specifically ones created by technology. Technology is this wonderful thing that has given us access to the world, but it's also stripped us of all that the world has to offer. And by that, I mean, now anytime we're bored, we can whip out a smartphone, start scrolling through Instagram, or watch a video on YouTube, even when we're hanging out with our friends. And I've seen this happen so much that I've heard the phrase, hang up and hang out, thrown around at people. Living in the moment is all about where we give our attention. And we already love to put the attention on ourselves, but our phones and other facets of technology love to steal that attention as well. It gives us agency that we can do nothing with, and distracts us from the beauty of creation that surrounds us. Now, this isn't some crazy rant that we should go out and destroy all of our smartphones, but rather just a plea that we become conscious users. One simple trick I've learned to stop staring at a screen so much is to learn of all of the harmful effects it has on me, such as chronic neck and back pain, loss of sleep, becoming fat, impaired cognitive functions, here's a big one here, an increased likelihood to die at a younger age, and impaired vision. If we were able to treat our obsession with phones, we'd be able to fully notice the beauty of creation that surrounds us. But why must we stop, look, and listen to life? And why must we live in the moment to experience life to the full? In a brief summary, Steve Bell, a Canadian musician I interviewed earlier this semester, said that living in the moment is noticing God in everything. It's seeing the beauty of His creation and allowing the goodness of that to reflect the goodness of our Creator. To emphasize this point, he told me a story. One day, him and his grandson were out on a walk, and his grandson tripped and fell on the sidewalk. As his grandson was picking himself up, he looked down and exclaimed, "Look, Papa, it's beautiful!" And Mr. Bell couldn't quite tell what he was looking at, so he himself had to get down on his hands and knees. And then he saw this tiny, little, minuscule red bug, the kind of bug that Mr. Bell described you'd have to fall on your face to see. And this got him to think, why would God ever create something so small, so tiny, so inconsequential that it'll probably be never noticed by anyone in any capacity? And he concluded, it's because God is love. He intentionally created that little red bug just as he intentionally created everything else that exists. So Mr. Bell took this mode of thinking and brought it to the rest of his life. And later that day, he told me he ate a croissant. And he told me he began to notice the texture of it, how it smelled, how it looked, and finally how it tasted. And he described it as absolute magic with a little bit more colorful language that I'm not allowed to repeat. He said that viewing life in this way made everything simply amazing. So the reason we must stop, look, and listen to life, the reason we have to live in the moment to experience life in the full, is so that we can notice God and His creation. We have to be able to see the beauty of God's creation to see the goodness of our Creator. Look at the mountains we have here in Colorado, and think about how our God intentionally created those. Think about every single person's face in this room and how our God delicately designed them. And think about the songs of the birds and how God made it so that they can sing and that we can hear them. Mr. Bell also claimed that if you're able to live in this line of thinking, then you'll never have a bad day again. Just days that are worse than others, but the beauty of God will always shine through. This, as Frederick Buechner put it, is basically impossible to do. Only Jesus Christ was able to always live in the moment because he was God and he was love. And he saw the world and all of God's creation through this loving mindset. So stop, close your eyes, and listen to my voice. An old, silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond, splash! Silence again. Matthew 6:25. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body or what you will wear. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Yes, that is living in the moment. Christ continues on to say how even the birds of the air have food, and the flowers of the field have clothes more splendid than Solomon, and all that jazz. So stop, look, and listen to God, and notice him. Notice him fulfilling this promise he made to you, that he's going to provide for you. Notice him in the frog that jumps into the pond, or in the American Gothic, or in Frank Sinatra's You Make Me Feel So Young, or in that tiny little inconsequential bread bug. Notice him and hear him and see him in ways you thought impossible, and know that the creator of everything that exists has your lives in his hand, and know that you need not worry because of that. So open your eyes and go. Go experience life to the full.